Thank you, Greg. Can you all hear me? Yes. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I am Darrell Missey. It is great to meet you all. I've had a great time here. I've enjoyed the chance to come. So, all right. I'm going to talk to you about the church down the street. This is the talk that I gave in Dallas. Or it's one of them. I did a little TED Talk kind of thing for 10 minutes, and then I did this. And this is kind of a combination of a sermon that I've preached at churches before and things that I've said to our agency about what we need to do. So you've got this sort of melded thing that it is. And the idea is this, that I'm asking and I'm suggesting to you that if every church on every corner in America made it our business to take care of the struggling families in our neighborhoods, to take care of those kids who are coming into foster care, that it would forever change the child welfare system. It would forever change this thing in a much, much better way. This is an actual church in Jefferson County, Missouri, that had an impact on a struggling family that was down the street. And that family looked like this. There was a mom and a dad, and there were 3 kids. Their ages were 7, 5, and newborn. And from the outside, that family looked okay, but inside of that home, there was a serious problem because the mother had developed a severe mental illness. She had the kind of bipolar disorder where she would swing from week to week between psychotic mania and suicidal depression. In the middle of all that, the condition of the home became very bad. There were piles of dirty laundry everywhere and dirty dishes in the sink and grime all over the stove and old food in the refrigerator. The dad would come home and try to fix it, but the mother would not let him do that, and she was becoming violent with him. The baby was not being cared for well, was crying through the night. Every night, the dad would try to sleep so that he could get up and go to work the next day. One night, he got so frustrated by all the crying that he stood up out of bed and he kicked a hole in the wall. Now, this is a family in crisis. And for those of us who do this kind of work, we have seen families like this one over and over and over again. But this particular family, I got to see up close and personal, because the family that I just described to you was my family in the year 1974. I'm the 7-year-old in the story. Now, a bunch of you right now are doing math in your head to figure out how old I am. You are. It's not too hard. It's 2024 minus 1,974 plus 7. That guy is 57 years old. Yes, I am. And, and I don't know how that happened, because just a few minutes ago, I was the young guy. And now all of a sudden, I'm eligible for senior discounts. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know how. But they know. Somehow they know you're eligible for the senior discount. You know what this is, don't you? I don't know how. I mean, all of a sudden my haircut was just cheaper. I'm like, what? Really? I mean, is it because there's less of it? Is it because it's gray? What is it? No, this happened a very, very long time ago, and I did not go into foster care. Give me a second. I need to find something here. Yeah. They make everything so secure that you can't get in it. So I didn't go into foster care. Something different happened for my family. And ultimately, it did involve eventually that church down the street that made all the difference. But as I was a judge in Jefferson County, and I encountered the situation where, we had so many kids in foster care, and I've got problems with foster care, which I'll explain to you later, because just of what it does to kids psychologically, but I had to order them there. It's what we had to do. We didn't have enough foster homes, and I realized that, wow, if every church in this county took on one family, it would change the face of this thing. It's what we need to do. So I encourage churches to do this. So I know, and I watched them do it. I watched churches jump in and do it. So I know how churches can help. And there are three basic ways I'm telling you that churches can help. Does this work? I turned it on, guys, I promise. There it is. Did you do it or did I do it? You did it. All right. Well, I'll keep at it and we'll see how it goes. All right. Churches can help prevent foster care. You could provide foster care and can move beyond foster care. You could do all of it because, you go to these things, you'll hear James 1:27 quoted because, the pure religion that James tells us that God honors is to care for widows and orphans in their distress. Those are people whose family units have ceased to function. But why would we do that? Why is that true? It's true because we love them. That's our call. Our call is to love the Lord our God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. We are called to love, and that is not love that sits still. John tells us, did you do it or did I do it? I did it. Awesome. Oh, there we go. Love requires action. Let us not love with word or with talk, but in deed and in truth. It requires something, and that we do something. Not out of guilt, but out of compulsion of love. And I'll tell you, I quote a lot of people. There's probably only one original thing I've ever said, and that is this. You can say, Darrell says this: you cannot love your neighbor while minding your own business. You can't do it. I'm going to love my neighbor and stay in my house and watch Netflix. That's what I'm going to do. That is not loving your neighbor. That is loving Netflix. It's a totally different thing. And the reason we know that is because of what the gospel tells us. It's because of what Jesus tells us. So, if you're a church person, you're going to find this a familiar story. This is from Luke chapter 10. If you're not a church person, I hope you really like it. Luke chapter 10. And behold, a lawyer stood up and put Jesus to the test. Now, I've highlighted the word lawyer here because, as you've heard, I'm a lawyer. And this guy is thinking like a lawyer. Now, I know this guy is not an American civil trial attorney like I was, but he's thinking like one. You'll see, he's applying rules to facts and being very lawyerly. A lawyer stood up and put Jesus to the test, saying, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, Jesus here doesn't give a sermon or he kind of plays Socrates here. He kind of puts it back on him, and he asks him the question. He says, well, let's have a conversation. What do you think? Jesus said to him, well, what is in the law? How do you read it? And the lawyer, knowing the law, said to him, and he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus responded to him and he said to him, you've answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Well, that should be the end of it. That's a nice, tidy conversation. You got a nice Sunday school question. You get a nice Sunday school answer. And it should be done. This should end it. But it does not end the conversation. Why not? Why not? Because this guy's a lawyer. Because he's a lawyer. All right, these, by the way, are the lawyers of the Wegmann Law Firm from a long time ago. I'm the young fella in the back there, okay? So this is from a long time ago with all those law books there, and this guy is acting just like a lawyer because you've always got to ask the next question. Do you know any lawyers? Are any of you lawyers? You're a lawyer? Are you always asking the next question? My wife tells me, don't cross-examine me. I'm sorry. It's what I'm trained to do. It's like you're always asking the next question. They're asking for a definition. They're asking for definitions, and that's exactly what this guy does. He acts like a lawyer. But desiring to justify himself, he said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Define the word neighbor for me, will you? I mean, is my neighbor the person who lives on the left of me and the right of me? Is it the people who live in my cul-de-sac? Is it the people in my zip code? Who is my neighbor? Now, this is a terrible question. This is a horrible, awful, evil question. Because think about it logically. This lawyer should be able to think about it logically. He's a lawyer, after all. What's the question really? You get to it. I want to get to it. Okay. Rule. I must love my neighbor. Question. Who is my neighbor? What's really the question? Who do I have to love? Who do I have to love? That is an awful, evil question. And you know what? Jesus doesn't answer the question. Jesus destroys the question. He destroys it. He turns it upside down. He pulls it inside out. He makes mincemeat of this question by giving us the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, if you're a church person, you've had to hear the parable of the Good Samaritan over and over and over again. I'm sorry. It's just so good. You're going to hear it again. Because Jesus said, and a man, well, just starts telling a story. A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. The reason that I highlight a person who stripped and beaten, departed, and left half dead is because that is how the people who are engaged in our child welfare system feel when we get done with them. You think about the things that happen to people. That is where we find them. And now by chance a priest was going down that road. Now this is the religious guy, right? He knows the rules. He knows what they're supposed to do. He knows they're supposed to love their neighbor as themselves. He knows all of these things. The priest is going down the road, and when he saw him, did the priest do anything wrong? Did he violate one of the 10 commandments, any of them? Did he violate any dot or tittle of the law? No. Know what he did? He minded his own business. He went to the other side of the road. It's not my problem. I'm going to have good boundaries. All right? That's what he did. Then along came a Levite. The Levite, again, are the religious class. They were there. They were the people who worked in the temple, and they were the religious, churchy people. He does the same thing. He went by, not my problem, going to mind my own business, went to the other side. All he did was mind his own business. But then Jesus introduces to us the hero of the story. But then a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. Now, Jesus does this on purpose. He's really needling this guy because what you learn is that the Jewish people in that day when Jesus was telling this story hated Samaritans. They hated them. They were the people who were, they were the people who kind of acted like they were religious but got it all wrong. This dispute went all the way back to the division of the kingdom between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. 1,000 years, a long time before, they still had all this animosity toward those people because you know what? They intermarried with Gentiles, and they screwed things up, and they believed the wrong things, and they thought the wrong things, and we just don't like them. In fact, people, there were Jews in the north and there were Jews in the south. People would avoid going through Samaria. They would avoid, just to avoid them. By the way, I got a map offline. It must be accurate because it was online. All right, so this is, by the way, I got a laser pointer too. Whew, all right. This is the coolest church. I love this place. All right, so Jesus was from up here in Galilee, Nazareth, right? To go to festivals, Jews who didn't like Samaritans, Jesus, there are a lot of stories of Jesus running into Samaritans, because you know why? Because he knew geometry, and that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So he would go straight through Samaria. But a lot of people wouldn't go through Samaria. They would go around Samaria. They would go and they would do, and by the way, it's not like you had nice bridges here. They would endure 2 river crossings. They would cross the Jordan River here, go down here with all of these complete pagan Gentiles. They would come down here and then go across. Now, I never noticed this until I did this about 40 times. But if you look at this map, if somebody did that and they were on a road, how would they get to Jerusalem? They would go on the road from Jericho to Jerusalem where this story happened. Isn't that interesting? I've had pastors say, I never thought about that. Well, look at now, I taught a pastor something. Look at that. That is exactly what they would do. And you know what I know? The reason I point this out is I think, in when we're involved with child welfare and other things, we encounter this. And we say to ourselves, there are people we don't like. There are people in communities we don't like. Are there people, let's be honest with yourself. You don't say it out loud. You just don't like them. You don't want to be around them. You don't live in their neighborhood. You stay over there and they stay over here, and you don't go anywhere near those people. And you would go around their town just to not see them. Do you have people like that? We've got people like that in the St. Louis area. Do you know who they are? They're Cubs fans. They are Cubs fans. All right, are there any Cubs fans in here? Anybody Cubs fans in here? Who you root for in West Virginia? You root for the Yankees? Who you root for? The Pirates. You're rooting for the Pirates. That's okay. You can root for the Pirates, just so long as you're not rooting for the Cubs. Because Cubs fans, I want you to understand, Cubs fans are different from Pirates fans. They're different from every kind of fan, because you know what they do? They come from down here to your stadium, Busch Stadium. This is the center of the universe here, all right? They come down here and they root for the wrong baseball team. And they do it loudly. And they spill their drink on you, and they don't apologize to you. They're Cubs fans for what is that? And you know what? You don't want to go through here. If you're going to Chicago, you want to go and land at Midway Airfield, because it lands in White Sox land and not in Cubs land. Now, I want you to know exactly how committed I am to being here today, because when I came here, I got on a plane in Columbia, Missouri, and I had a connecting flight. Where? O'Hare Airport, in the middle of Cub world. I get off the plane, and it was like Cub stuff everywhere. It was every place. It was I'm teasing you, you know. I do love Cubs fans, although they're obnoxious. I love them. Jesus makes a Cubs fan the hero of the story for a St. Louis Cardinals fan. That's what he does. A certain Cubs fan. So, okay, he says, but a Cubs fan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. And he saw him. What happened first? Something internal happened first. He had compassion. He had compassion, and he went to him, and he bound up his wounds. Okay, now he's taking action. Touching him. He could be dead. He could be sick. He could have a disease. I'm taking a risk. I'm going to him. And then I put him on my own animal. All right, I'm using my resources. And I took him to an inn to take care of him. It goes on. This thing doesn't work. And the next day, he took out 2 denarii. Okay, that's in green, because now you're talking about money, Darrell, and this is getting pesky. All right, so then he took out 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will pay you when I come back. Okay, now I've committed my future. This is the Samaritan. The Cubs fan does this. And Jesus then twists the question on him, says, which of these was the neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? Not who is the neighbor you have to love. What loving neighbor is taking care of you? The person you're supposed to be loving is loving you. I mean, it's just, there's a sermon series in here, pastors. There's a series on this thing. I don't have time. I've got 27 minutes and 26 seconds. That's all I got. All right. And he said to him, the one who had mercy. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. Now, this teaches us a lot of stuff. But here are the basic things that I think it teaches us here. We should love everyone. Everyone. And that means we should take action on behalf of everyone. We should love these kids. And you do, or you wouldn't be here. I hear about people loving kids all the time. They're easy to love at a certain level. And then they get to a certain age, and then we can't find placements for them because they're preteens or whatever, right? You should love these kids. You should love their parents. Now, this is hard for some people. This is where some people go, well, wait a minute. I don't care about a bunch of people who've abused and neglected their children. Well, why did they do that? Where were they from? How did all that happen to them? Those are questions you have to ask. But by and large, that is not the bulk of our cases. Is it, Jeff? It's not the bulk of our cases. Most of our cases are loosely what we would term as neglect, and it's fueled by addiction and poverty and mental illness. And that could strike any of us, and in fact, it has stricken me. You heard the story, right? So some people say, well, addicts, really? I don't care about a bunch of people who chose drugs over their children. Well, we need to send people some training about addiction, for one thing, but as a treatment court judge who's been there with people over and over and over again, and as a juvenile judge who dealt with kids who were acting out, I will tell you this, most of the time, people did not choose drugs over their children. They chose drugs when they were children. Now they're addicted, captured, possessed. And now they've walked into adulthood, and now they're having children, and they can't escape. That sounds like exactly the kind of person Jesus would have walked up to and said, be healed. Rise and walk. So we should love the kids. We should love their parents. We should love Cubs fans and Pirates fans and Yankee fans, whoever they are. And we should love Samaritans, and we should love addicts, and we should act. Well, what should that action look like? So I've talked to you about three ways in which we should, I believe we as the church should act with regard to the foster care system, the child welfare system. And one of them is in preventing foster care altogether. And we are making efforts to do prevention work in Missouri for the first time ever. But why in the world would we do that? I mean, why would we do that? I mean, isn't everything better in foster care? I mean, isn't foster care safe? Isn't that going to make it all better for these children? And the answer is sometimes. Sometimes. Even if the foster home even if the house they were taken from was just hideous and terrible, and the foster home is wonderful and glorious, it does something psychologically to these people. And I know because I've talked to them for 30 years, from the time I was a young lawyer to now. When I represented them in court, I was a guardian ad litem a lot, and then I became a judge, and I'd ask them all questions about how they were doing, and even to now, I asked them, what do you want, and what do you need, and what happened to you, and what did you lose? What happens to a child when they go into foster care? What happens to them? Well, the first thing is they lose their mom and their dad or whoever was caring for them, and almost always, with rare exception, they just want to be with those people again. Because we don't have enough foster homes, right? We have trouble keeping sibling groups together, right? So then they end up splitting you up. We just heard a story about it today. Now they've lost their brothers and their sisters. They lose their house, they lose their room, they lose their toys, they lose their stuff, they lose their dog. Do you know how many times I've had kids in my courtroom crying over the loss of their dog? I have placed kids with their dog. I've done that. It's like, sketchy Aunt Susie, everybody's worried about her, but she'll keep the dog. I entered the order. They're so crazy. It worked out okay. And that child was much happier because she could be with her dog. It's an important thing. Then what happens? You don't have enough foster homes in this town, I can almost guarantee it. So then what happens? You're looking for them anywhere they are. So then you have to send kids to foster homes that are across town or out of town or across the state. Now what do they lose? They lose their neighborhood, they lose their school, they lose their teacher, they lose any activities they might have been involved in, and they lose all of their best friends. We leave them with nothing. And it chills me to the bone because I know it could have been me. If this system that we had in this country right now had encountered my family in the spring of 1974, it would have been me. And what would I have lost? That's me. With my little sister, 2 years before the wheels came off, 2 years before my mom's bipolar disorder really kicked in. It kicked in with the birth of my baby sister. And she lost all touch with reality. Saw things that weren't there, heard things that weren't there. And my mom was brilliant and wonderful and amazing. But man, that got really, really tough. And psychiatric treatment in the 1970s isn't what it is today, I will tell you. So I would have lost Michelle, and I would have lost that house, and I would have lost that room, and I would have lost that dog whose name was Lad and is the best dog I ever had, except for maybe the one I've got right now. I don't know. And this is my little house. It was too crowded and it was too small, and there was one bathroom, and I had 2 sisters. That was rough. And but everybody always wanted to come over to my house to hang out. Why? Because my house we live just south of St. Louis at the beginning of the Ozarks, and it's kind of like this in a way, in that there are no flat yards to play like football in or whatever, except for mine, because all the rest of the yards are like this. Mine was the flat yard. Everybody goes to Darrell's house, right? I would have lost this. I would have lost Murphy School. This happened to me. This happened to me in the 2nd grade. As I was getting ready to talk about this stuff, somebody, a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine, put this picture up on Facebook. She put this up there. It's like, what's that? That is my 3rd grade class. Anybody want to guess which of these kids is me? Any guesses? This is I love doing fun. Any guesses? Fourth from the, where at? Third from the other side. This guy here? This one right here? That one right here? That's Jeff Leith. She asked, who do you know? Who remembers all these people? The answer was Darrell did. No, this other guy here, that was Jimmy Horton. He lived up the street from me. He played second base on my baseball team. Any other guesses? The guy with the jersey? This guy? That's Chris Schmitz. He played third base. No, I'll tell you. I'm the Boy Scout. Of course I'm the Boy Scout. I'm the Boy Scout. Who sends their kid to school a picture day with their Boy Scout uniform on? Who does that? A really quirky bipolar mom. That's who does that. All right. It was great. But really, it probably was the nicest thing I had. But yeah, I'm the Boy Scout, but I would have lost all these people. And I can tell you who each of these people are. A bunch of these people are my friends to this day. A bunch of them had Darrell Missey for judge signs out in their yard when I was a kid. And one guy, I wanna highlight this guy right here. That guy right there, his name is Brian Davidson. Brian remained a good friend of mine, and in the 8th grade, he became my locker partner. And then we went to different colleges, and we stayed really good friends through high school. And then we went to different colleges, but we stayed in touch. And well, he wound up, he was one of the groomsmen in my wedding. But then, the guy, I don't know, he just took it too far. Because then the cradle robber went off and married my baby sister. Okay. Now he's my brother-in-law. And I've got all of these nieces and nephews. I've got all this stuff. And you know what? None of it happens if you destroy my life in the 2nd grade. None of it happens. We don't have a crystal ball. So look, here's the thing. Kids who lose all this stuff, bad stuff goes on in their head. And I knew it when I was on the bench, but then I got here and I started reading the studies. This is all by a study from a law professor at the University of Baltimore who did a meta-study and did a study of the studies. And here's what happens to kids who get removed by force. They have trauma. They have addiction. They're more likely to commit crimes. They have academic failure. They're more likely to be unemployed. They're more likely to be homeless. They're more likely to be mentally ill. And we're not talking about the trauma of their rotten childhood. They're comparing children with similarly situated circumstances. Compare them. These are the numbers. The studies say that this is an intervention we have to do, but it has side effects. And it leaves people that way. You know, another scripture I talk about, which I'll talk about more on Sunday when I'm here at the church, is Matthew 25, where Jesus tells us to take care of the least of these. People who are hungry and thirsty, estranged, naked, and imprisoned, we're supposed to take care of them. And when we do it for one of those kids, we've done it for him. And we need to, because the science is that we do harm when we tread on people's lives too heavily. There's one professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School talking about what happens to a child when they're removed from a caregiver by force, the cascade of negative stress hormones and the brain structures that change, has said this. Dr. Charles Nelson has said, there's so much research on this that if people paid attention to the science, they would never do this. We would never do this, but we have to do it. We know safety requires we do it, but we better know when we do it. So I spent a lot of time doing a medical analogy with a buddy of mine. His name's Kevin Sprecher, and he says, well, what's your process? What's your process about, taking a child into foster care? I started to give him all the legal process, and he says, no, counselor, I don't know what legal process. I want to know the thought process. I told him, we don't have a process, Kevin. We run around like chickens with our heads cut off, and we see if it's safe. And if it's not safe, we put them in foster care, and if it is safe, we do nothing. And he says, oh, well, that's a process. It just looks like this. He says, this is a process. We did a process map at his kitchen table. No, it doesn't look like that. It looks like this. There, I've not been advancing this right. It looks like that. He says, well, I bet you got a lot of kids in foster care. He says, well, yeah, how do you know? He says, I want you to imagine we did hospital this way. He says, you come to the hospital. Are you dying? Yes, you get to go to the hospital. No, we do nothing. He says, you know what would happen? We would have a whole line of people out here who finally came to be dying, because what would happen is you'd show up with bronchitis. You're not dying. go away. Oh, now you got single pneumonia. You're not dying. Go away. Now you got double pneumonia. Well, now you are dying. Come on in. And you would just have a horrible cycle, and then you'd have all these people, and you would have more people than you could ever possibly handle. Does anybody remember I Love Lucy? Does anybody remember the candy factory scene? If you've never seen it, you should watch it, because this is Missouri's child welfare system right there. There it is. So look, we're just trying to do something different. We're trying to have a proactive process where we do prevention, find other avenues for help, get help in the community, and find the least invasive intervention we can. That's what we're trying to do. And then he said, what process would you like? And I said, look, here's what I'd like. I'd like a process where we ask some questions. I'd like a process where we take people in an emergency and ask them questions. And if they're safe, we say, okay, but why did you come to our attention, and how can we keep you that way? And get you to some services you need. And if you're not safe, let's have a meeting. Let's have a team decision-making meeting. We're reinstituting those in Missouri. And what would happen if we just had a meeting and we found out what the strengths were, and then I'd like to ask the Iowa questions. I learned from Iowa, Jeff, of all things. I talked to the director in Iowa. She said, we ask 4 questions before we take a child. She says, one is, can we remove the danger instead of the child? Or could we move somebody else in to make it safe? Or could we have a parent and the child leave and make it safe? Or can we get that child to a temporary placement that would make it okay? And then I would like to do that, and if we can, we do that, and then send them to all the services. And if none of that works, then we bring them into care, and guess what? We'll still bring half the people into care we're bringing into care now, but that would change the system. It would change it significantly and forever. So we did a process map, and it looks like that. Doesn't that look more sophisticated? Doesn't it look more complicated? Doesn't it look more thoughtful? But right here, this is what I want to talk to you about. This red box. It says link with needed services and supports. Why did we make that box red? Why did we do that? Well, because that's the key to the whole thing. And the truth is, the government doesn't do it. We don't have the capacity to do it. We'll never raise taxes enough to do it. You'll never get a bureaucrat to do this. It's the community that does this. We were talking about this yesterday, weren't we, Greg? Who is the community? You're the community. This church is the community. If every church on every corner did this, it would be something different. So what I'm asking people to do is to fill the red box. Fill it. Fill it with stuff. Fill it with all the things that you can. And you can fill it with things like mentors and recovery programs and transportation and childcare and home maintenance and job assistance and counseling and friendship. All those things could change the world for a family. But some of it won't work, and we're going to need foster homes, and you don't have enough. I know you don't have enough. I know I don't have enough. If you look at Missouri, so churches can provide foster care. And again, I don't think that you just recruit some foster parent out of your church and then leave them go. That's not right. They need help. They need a ton of help. It's a ton of work. I've talked to some people in here who fostered, right? How much work is it? How much work is that? How stressful, how painful, how difficult is all of that? It's very, very hard. In Missouri, at the time I did this, we had 12,600 kids. We now have 11,900 and something, so we're moving in the right direction. But we only had 4,500 homes. I'd like that number flipped. Why would I like more homes than I have kids? So some sit empty, so that somebody could take a break. And so that when a child comes into care in Fairmont, I can be certain that there's a foster home in Fairmont for them, right? We've got foster care deserts. I've got kids in northwest Missouri up near St. Joseph getting placed in St. Louis 4 hours away, totally foreign, different place. It's totally different. We need therapeutic foster homes. And when we do it, we need to do it right. There are churches that do it right, where when they're fostering that child, they're fostering that whole family if they can. They're taking care of people. People who do it wrong are people who become possessive about it and say, it's about me, and it's about my relationship with this child, and it's about my status. So what I tell people is do have mercy and don't judge the parents. Do help with reunification and don't fight to keep the kids. Do be open. We're going to need some of those people to adopt these kids. We're going to need some of them to be guardians for these kids. We're going to need some of them to be long-term solutions for these kids. Be open. But don't be willful and say, I won't or I have to. Don't do that. I've seen that happen, and do build relationships. Don't build walls. Do work together. Don't go it alone. We can also move beyond foster care. Once you've got a child in foster care, the question is, what needs to happen to get those kids back home? I asked at every court date, what needs to happen for this child to go back home? And a lot of times it was something that community could have provided for them. They need an extra room, they need this thing fixed, they need that thing done. Be open to guardianship and adoption. I don't know, there's a movie going to come out in July called Possum Trot. I don't know if you guys have heard about this thing, but a church in Texas just said, we're going to adopt all of those kids that are there that need adopted. We're coming for them. Like 22 families did it in this little church. That changes the world. And now it's got everybody's attention. It's going to be out of the movies, and I guarantee you lots of people, and help these older kids get toward independence. Those are the things that I think we can do. So I started this with a story, and I'm going to end it with a story and a half. This is the Jefferson County Courthouse. It is falling down. That central part right here was built in the 1880s, just in case you think you're the only place with buildings falling down and it's a mess. This is a mess. This is a giant mess. But my courtroom was over here in the more modern part that was built in the 1950s. That's great. All right, so this is where my courthouse, my courtroom was. And I saw the church engagement thing work in a way that is difficult to describe. There was a mom and a dad, and they were addicted to meth. They were so nice. They were so respectful. They worked so hard, and they were such addicts. And they did everything they were supposed to do except for stop using methamphetamine. I mean, they did everything. And so I noticed that a pastor I knew from the community started showing up in the back of the room. And then I watched things unfold in front of me, and I got all the story filled in by him later, after the fact. But here's what happened. One day, we were at the permanency level. We were at the permanency hearing, which is, we got to make a decision about whether these children are going home or something else is happening. And they were not in a good place. They were going to lose their kids. It was just what was going to happen. And they were desperate. And they drove past this guy's little church, and he had a sign out front that said, "Free counseling, inquire within." Well, what do we got to lose? They drove in there, and they talked to, I'll call him Pastor Stan. And I'm calling him Pastor Stan because that is his name. All right, so Stan talked to them, and he said to them, okay, they told their story, and Stan said, okay, I'll help you, but here's what you have to do. You have to do all of your treatment. You have to do all the things you're already doing. Do all that. But you're going to come in here, and we're going to sit down once a week together, and we're going to read this Bible. And we're going to talk about sin and forgiveness. And we're going to talk about sickness and healing. And we're going to talk about the power of God to change our lives. And you have to come to church. You're going to come to church every Sunday and sit in there and just listen to me. You do that, and I'll help you. They're thinking, well, we're desperate, so we'll do that. So they did that. And then suddenly, for the first time, their drug screens started to come back clean. And the texture of their hair began to return to normal. And they got jobs, and they got a place, and they got dental work. And suddenly it's being recommended to me to give them visits and more visits. I'm like, okay. It's like then there was a recommendation of a trial home placement, and I'm like, okay, I can't believe it's happening. And then they come to the last hearing where the report said they're going to request that we relinquish legal custody and give these children back to their parents forever. And I'm thinking, this is an amazing story. So I go into court and I sit down and I've got the order in front of me and I'm congratulating everybody on this really remarkable thing that happened. And then the mom stood up and said, "Judge, I have something I need to say." And I thought, no, don't say anything. Don't say anything and ruin my good story. Don't say anything. And she said, "I have to say thank you." She went around that room and she thanked every person who was there for what they'd done for it. The lawyer who filed the thing against her, the guardian ad litem. She filed something for everybody. She filed 6 minutes and 6 seconds. She filed. I'm getting used to that. She thanked everyone for all they had done. But then at the end she said, "But I want to make one thing perfectly clear. We would not be standing here today if it weren't for Jesus." Now, I got to tell you, every hair on my body stood up on end. And my eyes filled with tears because I knew she was right. I knew I was witnessing a true, verifiable, absolute miracle. I knew it was true. And the other reason is I could honestly say, yes, ma'am, me too. Me too. I've told you my story. I didn't tell you the rest of the story. Here's the rest of my family story. My mom went away to a mental hospital. We had what we call the Missey family, the Missey family safety plan. It looked like this. My mom went away to a mental hospital, and she was gone for 3 months. First thing in the Iowa questions, right? My grandmother moved in and cleaned the house. Second thing in the Iowa questions. And Mom came back. She was better, sort of, but that was bumpy. Mental health treatment in the 70s, she endured 47 shock treatments while conscious. She was on every kind of medication you can imagine. Eventually, they started giving her lithium. It changed everything. She was so much better, it ended up destroying her kidneys and killing her, but it was a deal she would have taken because she was able to come back from all of that. But it was a bumpy, bumpy time. And we were making it through, but it was difficult until we came to the attention of a church down the street that loved us. They saw us strangers and invited us in. They saw us in our needs, and they helped provide for them. They made us one of their own just by loving us. No demands, just loving us. And in 1 year, my entire family came to faith. And for us, that made all the difference in the world. That's a picture of us from the church directory. And it really, really changed everything. Question I have. They didn't have to do too much. What if every church in America made it our business to do for these struggling families what that church did for mine? Just showed up and loved us. What if we did that? What would happen? Well, I don't know for sure, but I can imagine. I can imagine a day when no child will ever go into foster care because of their family's poverty, because that family's being loved by a church down the street. And I can imagine a day when no child will ever lose their mom to a mental illness or an addiction because that mom and that kid are being loved by a church down the street. I can imagine a day when no child who has to go into foster care is going to get sent far away and lose their brother and sister and their neighborhood and their teacher and their dog and all their friends because there are a ton of open and loving foster homes in a church down the street. I can imagine a day when no child will ever have to be choosing between loving their foster family and loving their biological family because the foster family loves their biological family just like they were taught to do at a church down the street. I can imagine a day when the vast majority of what we now call the child welfare system will become unnecessary and irrelevant because of the love of the churches down the street. What would happen if we did it? Think about it. It would impact that child, it would impact that family, it would impact generations. Things would never be the same. I know what it did for me and mine. Come on now. It did this. That was my mom the year before she died. We were having lunch together, at least our lifetime. My dad had passed away from cancer in '96. We thought we'd lost him. I mean, we did lose him. We thought we'd lost her, because how could she survive that? Faith, that's how. Community, that's how. And this was, she liked for me to take her to lunch at Panera, and she was at assisted living. I would go there and visit with her there, and she would, the local church had to designate a van to go by where she was in assisted living because she just invited everybody to come to church with them. She did. And she passed away. She was on dialysis. The lithium destroyed her kidneys, and she was on dialysis for 7 years. And finally said, I have to stop. I just have to stop. And she said, listen, don't be sad and don't be angry. She said, it's a deal I'd take. It's a deal I'd make. I can take this. I can take this pill, and I'll be able to raise my family, and I'll know my 9 grandchildren, and I'll live till I'm 72. She says, I'll take the deal. And she considered it a gift from God. So did I. And I think this is what we can do together. We can make a difference that'll last for lifetimes. So I thank you all for what you're doing and for what you're going to do, for all these families like mine, and for all these kids like me. God bless you all. Thank you very much.